digital clock in the corner of the room blinked 11:45 p.m. as I stepped into the office to start my night shift at the Sunnyvale Rehab Clinic. For 3 years, the night shift has been my routine at this place. The quietness that enveloped the building contrasted starkly with the turmoil of the surrounding neighborhood, creating a palpable atmosphere of tension. I settled into my desk, preparing for yet another night of endless paperwork and constant monitoring of the security cameras. The gate monitor on the left wall emitted a faint glow, while the doorbell camera occupied the opposite space. The black and white images flickered silently, a window to the outside world that separated our island of recovery from the urban chaos. I immersed myself in the paperwork, occasionally glancing at the screens out of pure instinct. It was during one of those routine checks that I spotted him for the first time. A tall, lanky man passed by the gate, his pace slow and deliberate, immediately capturing my attention. He stopped abruptly, as if he had heard a silent call, and then, with an unsettling calm, he slowly turned towards the camera. His eyes, my God, those eyes, vacant, devoid of any spark of life or recognizable emotion. It was as if he were looking through the lens directly into my soul. The expression on his face was one of morbid serenity, as if he were contemplating something beyond human comprehension. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt my stomach twist with a growing sense of dread. Forcing myself to follow protocol, I buzzed the intercom to check if he needed assistance. "Hello, sir? Can I help you with something?" My voice echoed in the silence of the night, but there was no response. He remained still, his eyes fixed on the camera, as if he could see me through it. In that moment, the scary night shift stories I had heard from more experienced colleagues took on a new and terrifying dimension of reality. The minutes dragged on like hours while the strange man continued his silent vigil in front of the camera. My heart was pounding frantically against my ribcage, a constant reminder of the fear that was seeping into every fiber of my being. The clinic's rule echoed in my mind. The clinic's rule echoed in my mind. If they're not hurt or trying to climb the fence, let them be. But how could I ignore that disturbing presence? I tried to focus on the paperwork, but my eyes were inexorably drawn back to the monitors. The man's vacant expression remained unchanged, his dead eyes fixed on the camera with an intensity that bordered on the supernatural. There was nothing paranormal about this situation, I kept telling myself. He's probably just someone under the influence of synthetic drugs. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was facing something far more sinister. The hours passed, and the man hadn't moved an inch. His persistence was as disconcerting as his appearance. I considered calling the police, but hesitated. After all, he wasn't doing anything illegal, just staring. But that stare was like a weight on me, crushing my sanity bit by bit. It was as if the night shift had turned into a scary story from which I couldn't escape. At 3:45 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to take a walk around the clinic's perimeter, hoping that a change of scenery would ease the tension that was building inside me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the chilly morning air. The neighborhood was silent, a quietness that amplified every sound. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing off the walls of the neighboring buildings. When I reached the gate, my heart almost stopped. The man was gone. There was no trace of him anywhere. I spun around nervously, the flashlight illuminating every dark corner, but I found nothing. The relief I had hoped to feel was quickly replaced by a new kind of terror. Where had he gone? And why did his absence scare me even more than his presence? With my heart pounding, I hurried back to the office, locking the door behind me with trembling hands. The office, once a safe haven, now seemed eerily threatening. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more alive. I sat at my desk, my eyes fixed on the monitors. Nothing. No sign of the mysterious man. I tried to calm myself, breathing deeply and reminding myself that it was just a scary night shift experience. Nothing more. After all, I worked at a rehab clinic in a troubled neighborhood. Unsettling encounters weren't uncommon. But something about this situation felt different, more intense, as if I were living one of those true scary stories you hear around the campfire. I forced myself to get back to work, determined not to let the fear consume me. However, every few seconds, my eyes darted back to the monitors. The clock marked 4:30 when I noticed movement on the screen. My blood froze. There he was again, standing in the exact same spot, staring directly at the camera. But something was different. He seemed closer, as if he had taken a step towards the gate. His eyes, once vacant, now shone with an intensity that made me swallow hard. A slow, twisted smile formed on his lips, an expression that didn't reach his dead eyes. In that moment, I understood that this night of true terror was far from over. The man's eerie smile on the screen paralyzed me. My fingers trembled over the keyboard as I debated whether to call the police. The clinic's rule of non-interference echoed in my mind, but the instinct to call for help was overwhelming. The doorbell camera flickered, indicating movement. My heart almost stopped when I saw the man approach the gate. His movements were fluid, almost inhumanly graceful. He raised his long, pale hand towards the doorbell, his fingers extending towards the button. The strident sound of the bell cut through the silence of the early morning, making me jump out of my chair. With wobbly legs, I approached the intercom. "See, can I help you?" I stammered. Silence. On the screen, the man tilted his head, his twisted smile widening impossibly. "Let me in," he whispered, his voice a metallic rasp that made my hair stand on end. "I just want to talk." I swallowed hard, feeling cold sweat trickle down my back. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't let you in. Please go away, or I'll have to call the authorities." My voice sounded firmer than I felt. The man's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of fury so intense that I recoiled. He lunged at the gate, shaking it violently. "Let me in," he roared, his voice now unrecognizable, almost bestial. I rushed to the phone, frantically dialing the police. As I reported the situation, I heard a deafening crash. The man had broken through the gate. I locked myself in the office, my heart hammering as I heard footsteps approaching down the corridor. The doorknob turned, and I held my breath. The seconds dragged on like hours until, finally, I heard sirens in the distance. The footsteps retreated quickly, and when the police arrived, the man had disappeared again. As I gave my statement to the officers, I couldn't help but think that this terrifying night shift would change my life forever. The scary stories I used to hear with skepticism now seemed pale in comparison to what I had experienced. As the sun rose, marking the end of my shift, I vowed that I would never again underestimate the dangers that the night can hide. I work the night shift as a caregiver in a nursing home. It's not a dream job, but it pays the bills. The building, a converted old hospital, already carries a heavy atmosphere on its own. On that fateful night, I had no idea that I was about to experience one of the scariest true night shift stories. The clock struck 11 p.m. as I started my usual round. The dimly lit corridor stretched ahead of me, the peeling walls whispering secrets of decades past. The smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask the persistent odor of decay. As I walked, the sound of my footsteps echoed, mixing with the constant hum of the fluorescent lights. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the silence. I froze in my tracks, my heart racing. It was the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal, coming from the outdoor yard. My hands trembled as I approached the window, trying to decipher the shadows dancing in the darkness outside. That's when I saw him, a tall, lanky figure, cloaked in black robes that billowed in the night wind. In his bony hands he held something that glinted under the moonlight, a scythe. My blood ran cold as I realized someone was dressed as the Grim Reaper, walking through the yard and knocking on doors. Panic took hold of me. My mind screamed to run, to call for help, but my body seemed frozen. I watched, horrified, as the figure moved from door to door, knocking with a slow, deliberate cadence. The metallic sound of the knocking echoed through the nursing home, as if announcing the arrival of death itself. The sound of the knocking continued, each thud reverberating through the empty corridors. My heart hammered in my chest as I forced myself to snap out of my stupor. I had to do something, to alert someone. With trembling legs, I rushed to the nursing station, my fingers frantically dialing the phone. "Security? There's someone in the yard, dressed as the Grim Reaper," I whispered, my voice shaking. The guard on the other end of the line promised to arrive in minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. The residents were starting to wake up, confused and scared voices echoing from their rooms. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It was my duty to soothe the elderly, even though I myself was on the verge of a breakdown. I walked down the corridor, whispering words of comfort through the half-open doors. "It's all right. Go back to sleep. It's just a misunderstanding." But it wasn't all right. The noise outside had ceased, and a sepulchral silence had taken over the place. Suddenly, a sharp scream cut through the air, coming from the room at the end of the corridor. I ran towards the sound, my heart in my throat. The door was ajar, and I could see the silhouette of the Grim Reaper looming over one of the beds. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting grotesque shadows on the wall. The resident, usually a calm old man, was sitting upright, his eyes wide with terror. "Death has come for me," he shouted, pointing at the shadowy figure. My body reacted before my mind could process. I grabbed the first object I found, a bedside lamp, and advanced into the room. "Get out of here," I shouted, brandishing my makeshift weapon. The figure turned abruptly, the plastic scythe falling to the floor with a dull thud. In that moment, the mask of death slipped, revealing a young, scared face. He wasn't a monster, nor a supernatural entity. He was just a boy, no older than a teenager, trembling with fear in the face of my threatening stance. I'm sorry," he stammered, tears welling up in his eyes. "It was just supposed to be a prank. I didn't mean to actually scare anyone." The adrenaline began to dissipate, leaving me exhausted and confused. The elderly man in the bed looked from me to the boy, his expression oscillating between fear and confusion. In that instant, the security guards finally arrived, breathless and with wide eyes. I quickly explained the situation, watching as they gently but firmly escorted the young man out. The rest of the night passed in a blur of reports, explanations, and attempts to soothe the agitated residents. When the sun finally rose, marking the end of my shift, I felt drained. The true night shift horror stories aren't always about ghosts or paranormal phenomena. Sometimes, the true horror lies in the unintended cruelty of youth, in the frailty of old age, and in the loneliness we all face. As I walked home exhausted, I promised myself that I would bring more light to the dark nights of that nursing home. The walk home had never felt so long. The empty morning streets echoed the sound of my weary footsteps, while my mind replayed the events of the night. The dawning sky began to brighten, but the shadows of the experience still lingered over me. Arriving at my apartment, I collapsed on the sofa, too tired to even take off my shoes. The silence that once brought me comfort now felt oppressive, heavy with the memories of the screams and the fear I had witnessed. I closed my eyes, but the images continued to dance in my mind. The scared boy, the terrified elderly man, the distorted shadows on the nursing home walls. I realized that true terror isn't found in Grim Reaper costumes or plastic scythes. It's in the loneliness that drives a youth to seek attention in such drastic ways, and in the frailty of old age, so vulnerable in their final moments. The night shift horror had revealed more about the human condition than any ghost story could. I got up with difficulty and went to the window. The morning sun cast a golden light over the city, as if trying to erase the shadows of the night. I made a decision in that moment. I wouldn't let fear dominate me. I would go back to work the next night, determined to bring a little more compassion and understanding to that place. As I prepared for sleep, I reflected on how true scary stories often don't involve monsters or paranormal phenomena. Sometimes the real terror lies in the small cruelties, in the failures of communication, in the loneliness we all face. And perhaps I thought as sleep finally claimed me. True courage lies in facing these realities night after night, bringing a little light to the darkness. The heavy air of the night enveloped the rest home like a suffocating mantle. I was sitting in the quiet lobby, surrounded only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional groan of the old pipes. It was yet another night on my extra shift, part of my plan to fund my long-desired trip abroad. The clock struck 2:13 a.m., and the silence was almost palpable. The empty corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, their shadows dancing on the walls with a life of their own. I tried to focus on the paperwork in front of me, but my eyes kept wandering to the dark ends of the hallway. That's when I saw her, a frail, hunched figure at the far end of the lower corridor, her gray hair shimmering softly under the faint light. I immediately recognized the familiar profile. She was one of our oldest residents. I sighed, wondering why she was up so late. "Let's get you back to bed," I said, getting up and walking towards her. The cold floor creaked under my feet, echoing down the empty corridor. A soft voice behind me replied, "Okay." The sound made me freeze in my tracks, a chill running down my spine. Slowly, very slowly, I turned to face the source of the voice. There, sitting in a chair in front of the turned-off TV, was the same lady I had just seen in the corridor. My heart leaped to my throat, and I felt the blood drain from my face. She looked at me with a confused expression, clearly not understanding my reaction. My eyes darted back to the corridor, but the figure I had seen was gone. The corridor was empty, the shadows dancing on the walls as if mocking me. My mind struggled to process what had happened. Horror, what had I seen? Terror began to seep into my bones, a chilling sensation spreading from my chest to my extremities. This was the kind of night shift story you hear about in places like this, but never expect to experience personally. Now here I was, living my own scary story. My heart was pounding as I stood still, torn between the empty corridor and the lady calmly sitting in the chair. The silence that had once been oppressive was now deafening. I tried to compose myself, breathing deeply and forcing a trembling smile. "Are you all right? You seem to have seen a ghost," the elderly lady commented, her frail voice cutting through the tense air. The irony of her words didn't escape me, making my stomach churn. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "Hi, I thought I saw something," I stammered, my eyes still darting between her and the corridor. You've been up recently?" The words came out hesitant, dreading the answer. She slowly shook her head. "No, dear. I've been sitting here all night. Can't sleep, you know." Her gaze was gentle, but there was something in it that troubled me. As if she knew more than she was saying, I slowly walked back to my desk, my steps echoing on the linoleum floor. Every shadow seemed to move, every dark corner hiding secrets. The night shift, once just tedious, now felt laden with a sinister energy. I sat down, trying to focus on the paperwork again, but my eyes kept wandering to the dark ends of the hallway. Was it real, that figure I had seen? Or was it my tired mind playing tricks on me? This kind of thing doesn't happen in real life, right? True scary stories are just that, Streets. The hours dragged on, and I kept catching myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something, anything, that could explain what had happened. The lady remained in her chair, occasionally dozing off, but mostly just staring blankly at the turned-off TV. When the clock finally struck 6:00, I felt immense relief. The night shift was almost over, and soon the first rays of sun would banish the night shadows. But there was still a question haunting me, one that I feared to ask, but knew I had to. "Mom," I began hesitantly, approaching her. Have you seen or heard anything strange tonight?" My heart was racing as I waited for her response. She slowly turned to me, her tired eyes suddenly seeming infinitely older and wiser. "Dear," she said softly, "in this place, the walls have memories. Sometimes they show us things we don't understand, but don't worry, they can't hurt us." Her words, though meant to comfort, sent a new chill down my spine. What memories did these walls hold? What stories could they tell? And more importantly, what else might I see before this scary night shift ended? The sun began to creep through the windows, painting the lobby with soft shades of orange and pink. Normally this sight would bring me relief, marking the end of my night shift. But today the daylight felt fragile, unable to fully dispel the shadows that had accumulated during the night. As I gathered my things, I heard footsteps approaching. It was the day shift nurse here to take over. His familiar face was a welcome sight after a night of eerie encounters and troubling questions. "How was the night?" he asked casually, hanging up his coat. I hesitated. How could I explain what had happened without sounding completely crazy? "It was interesting," I finally replied, Have you? Have you ever seen anything strange here during the night? He paused in his task and looked at me with a curious expression. Strange how? I took a deep breath. Like a person who shouldn't be there. Someone you see but who disappears in a blink of an eye. The day nurse stood still for a moment, his face a mix of emotions I couldn't decipher. Finally he spoke. You know, there are stories about this place, stories that the older staff tell the newcomers. About nurses who still make their rounds long after they've passed away. About residents who appear in 2 places at once. My heart raced. So, I'm not the only one? He nodded. No, you're not. This place. It holds stories, memories. Sometimes, these memories come to life in their own way, especially during the night shift. I stood there, absorbing his words. The rest home suddenly felt different. It wasn't just a place of care, but a repository of lived lives, of accumulated experiences over decades. What am I supposed to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The nurse smiled gently. Do your work, care for the residents, and if you see something, well, remember that not all terror is something to be feared. Sometimes, it's just the past wanting to be remembered. As I prepared to leave, I glanced back at the corridor where I had seen the mysterious figure. In the morning light, it seemed ordinary, even welcoming, but now I knew there was more to these walls than my eyes could see. I walked out of the rest home with a new understanding. The night shifts would still bring scary encounters and tense moments, but now I saw them as part of a larger tapestry of experiences. A continuum of lives lived and stories to be told. As I walked home under the dawning sky, I realized I had found something more valuable than money for my long-desired trip. I had discovered a purpose, a connection to the past and the present. And though the nights could still be scary, I now embraced them as part of the rich tapestry of experiences that made up the life of that rest home. The true night shift horror stories were no longer something to be feared, but a constant reminder of the continuity of life, of care and compassion that transcends time. And I now was part of this ongoing story. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.